All right, you guys, happy Thursday. I promised you I would do an episode on the JFK files. Well, this is just the beginning of it. And what I can tell you guys in a sentence is that the conspiracy theorists, we were right again. Always, it seems, nowadays. Tucker Carlson was definitely on the money when he said that being referred to as a conspiracy theorist these days just means that you're educated like beyond the mainstream media and the public education system, which is making everybody dumb. So for those of you guys who have not read Chaos yet and are not a member of our book club, we are going to take you down the JFK rabbit hole, the beginning of it. Welcome back to Candace. All right, guys, the JFK files have been cracked open. What does it mean? Well, what it means right now is that if you are a Jewish American citizen, it is really high time for you guys to understand that you are under no obligation to keep defending the state of Israel, okay? Anti-Semitism is not happening when people judge the foreign state of Israel. We have to say that right at the top, right? I should make everybody right now just get up and do the Pledge of Allegiance, like old-fashioned style, like you're just in your 5th grade classroom. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, not under Israel, not under blackmail, okay? Like, we're all the same. We are Americans. And the only reason that you have that instinct, especially the Jewish Americans, is because there's this existential crisis that has been ingrained in you since your youth. Like, you have been indoctrinated to believe that supporting that state is existential. Really, like you're going to die if you don't. And we all have those things. It's cool. We've all been indoctrinated in some way or another in our youth. And that's kind of the social engineering of the classroom to make us really fearful. It's the reason why women are like, I support Planned Parenthood because I think men are going to take my ovaries if I don't. And then you kind of get older and you're like, wait a second, that doesn't really make any sense. Why do I fear the patriarchy? It's just a fear-based education system. Anyways, let's get to the beginning of it, really, and kind of make you understand where the conspiracy theorists were coming from since before these files got released. Okay, so we all know what happened on November 22nd, 1963. JFK was shot. President JFK was shot sitting alongside his wife in a vehicle that was traveling through the streets of Dallas. Now, it is important before we get into that you have a historical understanding of some other facts. Before Kennedy was elected president, Eisenhower was president. And right before Eisenhower left office, he warned the American public that a shadow was building, a shadow government, so to speak, was building in the background. He referred to it as a military-industrial complex. I want you to take a close listen to his words here.
We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So he's giving this warning, and it's interesting because obviously many of us were not alive during this time. Many of us who were alive during this time certainly wouldn't maybe recall that speech, but he's saying that this is new. Like, this idea of America always being at war is new, and it's not new to us. It's just like we can't stop being at war in the Middle East, Ukraine. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. The military-industrial complex is obviously real, and it exists, and we refer to this now as the deep state. And you should know that when JFK became president thereafter, he was explicitly against war. You have to understand, he too agreed that there was no need for us to be engaged in never-ending war. We're supposed to win World War II. And it turns out that there was something operating in the background that didn't really want that. And so Eisenhower's warning that these people could have undue influence, whatever this magic force is in the background, could have undue influence on American policy. And Kennedy gets in office and he's like, I'm not about this war. Take a listen to what he had to say at American University. This speech was given on June 10th, 1963, just a few months before he was assassinated.
I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Some say that it is useless to speak of peace, or world law, or world disarmament, and that it will be useless until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation, for our attitude is as essential as theirs.
So the question that we should ask is, why is it that as soon as you begin speaking about JFK, people refer to you as a conspiracy theorist? And in particular, you will notice that there are these Zionist accounts that freak out before they even know what you're going to say. So what is it about JFK's assassination that triggers Zionists? Why do they pretend that it's an act of anti-Semitism to explore the environment and the things that JFK was adamantly opposed to? I'm going to describe that to you, and I'm going to use only Jewish sources here, so we can remove ourselves from any claims of anti-Semitism. These are just the facts of what JFK was fighting while he was in office, okay? One of the things that he was opposed to was the American Zionist Council. He wanted them, which would go on to become AIPAC. We're still having a discussion about AIPAC's undue influence in our elections today. They were back then known as the American Zionist Council, and JFK's Department of Justice told them that they had to register as a foreign agent under FARA, okay? Now, I'm going to slow that down for you because many of you probably don't even know what FARA is. It stands for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It requires that any person or business entity that is accepting money from or acting as an agent to a foreign government must register with the Department of Justice. Now, you would have to, that means file reports. You'd have to detail your compensation. You have to detail your expenditures, your communications. Essentially, the reason for that is obvious, so that we as Americans know that we are being influenced by agents of another government. I personally wish that we would also be able to see this in terms of like right away knowing when people are lobbying, that they would have to announce that we are lobbying on behalf of Big Pharma and we accept money from them, but they don't have to do that, right? And so it would color your imagination, obviously, if I'm saying all these things and you find out that I'm registered under FARA for a foreign country like Ukraine, you would go, okay, well, that makes sense. Candace is telling me that we should go to war with Ukraine, but I now know that Candace is actually accepting tens of millions of dollars from Ukraine. That's the purpose of FARA registration. So when the American Zionist Council came into fruition in 1949, they were lobbying on behalf of the newly formed foreign state of Israel, okay? And the JFK said, you guys now need to register under FARA. Now, again, I've explained why that would be important, because it would change the way that you understood the news that was coming to you. You essentially would understand you were listening to a commercial. And sometimes you wonder when you see all these influencers, you're like, who's funding them? That natural question of who is funding them. It would be infinitely more important if you knew that it was somebody, it was a foreign country overseas. So we're going to take a lead up. We're going to take a look at, rather, the lead up to JFK's assassinations and his dealings with the Zionist group that he was trying to get to register under FARA. Look at this website, okay? This website, and we don't have a top of this. I want to know, Skylar, if you don't mind actually showing the Israel Lobby Archive. Okay, so I'm going to take you through just a timeline, and you can actually click and see these documents. These are documents that are published publicly. They all actually exist. And I'm going to take you through the relevant things leading up to the year of the communications that his Department of Justice, JFK's Department of Justice, had with the AZC saying, hey, you need to register as a foreign agent. So we'll go back a year before his assassination on October 31st, 1962. You can see that the Assistant Attorney General and the Director of Internal Security, who was J. Walter Yeagley, notifies Attorney General R.F. Kennedy that we are soliciting next week the registration of the American Zionist Council under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You may be aware that the American Zionist Council is composed of representatives of the various Zionist organizations in the United States, including the Zionist Organization of America. Excuse me. So there were a bunch of different organizations. They were all lobbying on behalf of Israel. And they were like, we're going to obviously pursue this. On November 21st, 1962, this is again like almost exactly a year before he gets assassinated, the Department of Justice ordered them, the AZC, to register under FARA. And there was a receipt of such funds from the American section of the Jewish Agency for Israel, constitutes the council. And essentially they were like, you absolutely must register. Your request is happening. And Skylar, I don't know if you've actually pulled any of these documents in, but if not, it's okay. We'll keep going down the timeline. Now, on December 6th of that same year, the president of AZC was a guy named Rabbi Irving Miller, and he responded to the Department of Justice, and he wrote this: the request for registration contained in your letter raises many questions of fact and of relationships, which first must be resolved by us before compliance can be made. Therefore, it is requested that you be good enough to grant us a delay of 120 days. Immediately already stunning, okay? The Department of Justice is saying to you in a letter, you need to register as a foreign agent, and you have the rabbi who's leading this group who says, your request is a little, we're gonna need some time actually to chew over that request, and you'll understand we need 120 days, okay? So within that 120-day time frame, they decided to officially incorporate AIPAC. On January 2nd, 1963, a man named Isaiah Kennan incorporated AIPAC instead. And then the AZC Council went back to the DOJ And it essentially said, like, you know, we're not ready actually to register, but now we have a new organization. It's known as AIPAC. And if you follow along on this timeline, so then you start to see that he incorporates, that's on January 2nd, 1963, Isaiah incorporates the American Israel Public Affairs, like I said, AIPAC committee in Washington, D.C. And then the day after, on January 24th, 1963, a couple of weeks after pardon, the DOJ draft file memo, they essentially say that they met with the AZC head counsel, and he had advised his client to just discontinue the previous agency as AZC, and they were like, we hope that that resolves the issue. Like, basically, we are a new incorporated AIPAC, and that should resolve the issue. And essentially, the DOJ said, no, that actually doesn't resolve the issue, and we're still going to need you to register, essentially saying, we need your expenditures. We need to know who's funding you guys, where this money is coming from, and we're not going to change our opinion on that. And they were still fighting him. They still were fighting and going, we're not going to give that to you whatsoever. What you have taking place there on January 25th, 1963, is you start to see these articles that start building in the press. And so they started creating a peer pressure campaign, essentially saying, and this is like a direct quote from the Wall Street Journal, that if they had gone through with this, if they kept demanding for the AZC to have to reveal to them their expenditures and who was funding them, that Jewish opinion would be bad for the DOJ. Like, that the American Jewish opinion was going to be bad, so they shouldn't go through with this. This was actually happening. And incredibly, even Donald Rumsfeld, who was a congressman at that time, wrote to the DOJ and said, I'm concerned that if you keep pushing this matter, then the Jewish Zionist opinion is going to transform in America. Absolutely wild. Like, this is the Department of Justice telling you to register, and now you are essentially lobbying politicians and you're lobbying journalists to start writing these articles and to essentially seed into the American mind and to seed into the political mind that this request is inappropriate. It's entirely inappropriate, because how dare you ask us to register? That doesn't make any sense. Don't you understand that we're Jewish and this isn't going to look good for you? That you can literally go to this website and look through the filings and look through the newspaper clippings, and this is the reality. There was a peer pressure campaign not unlike what we see today. When I speak about AIPAC and I speak about these journalists who act like hitmen, and if you don't acquiesce to whatever it is the state of Israel wants, they are out there calling you Hitler, anti-Semitic. They've got all of these influencers on an orbit online who we can assume are receiving money in some capacity, but we'll never know, because AIPAC is now a 501c3, and they never had to register as FARA, but they did this right in the beginning. And guess what? FARA came back and said, we don't care. We can bring that up, that timeline. FARA came back and said, we don't care, okay? That's not going to change anything. You are actually going to still have to register. It doesn't matter how many press articles are written. We are going to interpret this according to the law and not according to the feelings of Jewish Zionists in America. And so they go on, and you go back through this timeline, and it gets more and more aggressive. And finally, what happens is that Hoover, who was heading up the FBI at that time, says, do you want me to get involved? Is it time now for us to swoop in as the FBI and essentially say, you register or else? Like, are we at the point now essentially where we need to make arrests? And they're getting very serious about this, because they had already ordered for them to register within 10 days. And they still declined to do it. They still did not move whatsoever. And so they're sort of mulling this over, like, should we get the feds involved at a higher level? Should we get the FBI involved rather? And suddenly Farah comes back as well and says, like, we absolutely think that we should get them involved. Then you see this like measly attempt from the AZC council to say, well, will it suffice if we show you our income statements? And Farah says, absolutely not. This is absurd. This is a year on now, again, leading up to Kennedy's death. And you can see there on October 11th, 1963, the DOJ demands for AZC to register. The department expects a response from you within 72 hours with regards to this matter. And then you can see on the 17th that Walter Yeagley noted of a DOJ AZC a meeting that they essentially said they were making a plea for no registration, stating it was the opinion of most of the people that were affiliated with the council that such a registration would be so publicized by the American Council on Judaism that it would eventually destroy the Zionist movement. Now, I want you to think about that. If all you have to do to be, like, it's not a crime, you can be a foreign agent, right? If all you have to do once you become registered under FARA is to reveal your expenditures, reveal how you are being funded, allow people to understand where you are getting this money from, why would they be this opposed to it? A year on, using lawyers, calling judges to get involved, trying to persuade the public, trying to essentially cause a smear campaign and saying that it's going to radically shift Jewish opinion, that it's going to put the Zionist movement on pause. What would it have plausibly revealed if they had done that? I don't know the answer to this. I'm never going to know the answer to this, because what we do know is that a couple of weeks later, JFK got shot, okay? Now, if you're instantly connecting the dots and going, oh, well, of course, it must have been a Zionist who did this, I think that would be a little bit too far of a stretch. But when you compare the policies of JFK, who did not want them to be funded, and what was running parallel to this, of course, was that he was on the phone arguing, screaming, having fights with Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of Israel, because he also did not want Israel as a state to become nuclearly armed, okay? And they're fighting on the phone. They still won't declassify these arguments that he was having, but they absolutely were at each other's throats and they hated each other. And he was very opposed to the Dimona reactor. This is something that you can even find in speeches like the Gaddafi speech. When he speaks about what really happened to JFK, everybody knows that he was opposed, strongly opposed to Israel and nuclear armament. He kind of just leaves that out there. When you add those two things together, you go, okay, well, would it be a conspiracy to suggest that Ben-Gurion and the state of Israel hated him and he was opposed to them, and he was opposed to them getting funding, and he was opposed to them having undue influence in American politics, and then he dies? And then you weigh that against the fact that the problem for them instantly disappeared as soon as JFK died. Because what happened was that when Lyndon B. Johnson got into office, he was the vice president, all of their problems were instantly resolved because he reversed course on everything. What is interesting is that LBJ essentially employed the exact opposite policies of JFK. He was fundamentally pro-war, okay? Vietnam, Cambodia, the bombing campaigns. And it didn't come out until quite recently that he helped Israel get established as a state by secretly helping to transport weapons, exactly what JFK was against, exactly what Eisenhower before him was against. He secretly helped to transport weapons to Israel while he was in Congress. Now, don't take my word for it. If I said that fact, it would be anti-Semitic, right? Let's take that fact instead from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. This is literally an Israeli publication. They publish daily. They wrote, quote, this article you can see is entitled Lyndon Johnson, Israel has had no better friend. Historians generally regard Johnson as the president most uniformly friendly to Israel. And then it says, after John F. Kennedy was killed and Lyndon Johnson became the 36th president, LBJ told an Israeli diplomat, you have lost a very great friend, but you have found a better one. Indeed, it was Johnson, as a Senate Majority Leader who stood in the way years earlier of Dwight Eisenhower's plans to cut off assistance to Israel. Okay, I'm quoting this from the article. It's not from me. So we now know that while he was in Congress, he stood in the way of Eisenhower, who wanted to cut off assistance to Israel. Okay, and now we're understanding that he reversed his course on JFK's policy when he becomes the president. It goes on to say he knew few Jews growing up in Texas, but cultivated lifelong friendships as he rose through the ranks of the Democratic Party, which had become the natural political home for most Jews. Historians generally regard Johnson as the president most uniformly friendly to Israel. Johnson was the first president to invite an Israeli prime minister, Levi Eshkol, on a state visit. They got along so well, both men were farmers, that Johnson paid Eshkol the rare compliment of inviting him to his ranch. LBJ soon abandoned pressure on Israel to come clean about the Dimona reactor. He increased arms sales to Israel, and in 1968, after Israel's supplier, France, imposed an embargo as a means of cultivating ties in the Arab world, the United States became Israel's main supplier of weapons, notably launching the talks that would lead to the sale of Phantom fighter jets to Israel. Okay, so he was completely committed to the state of Israel. And if you're beginning to ask questions about, okay, why would that be? What could have been his background? Well, interestingly enough, it turns out that his aunt Jessie, and again, we will pull this up in the Jerusalem Post, we will pull this up in the Times of Israel, but his aunt Jessie Hatcher was a member of the Zionist organization. And it has been speculated, not by me, okay, but by Rabbi Shmuel Golden, that LBJ himself came from a maternal line of Jews. Now, his family dates back to the 1848ers, which were a bunch of communists who tried unsuccessfully to overthrow Germany. And then they all came to Texas and settled in Texas and Kansas and all throughout the United States, including the Pfizer family. But pulling this back up, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, who apparently looked into it. And this is a blog written by Richard Chasman on the Times of Israel. He writes, you can bet the ranch that Bernie Sanders will not be elected as the first Jewish president, but he might be the second. Who was the first Jewish president? LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. I thank Rabbi Shmuel Golden for making me aware of this fascinating story. He's now quoting from an article by Morris Smith in the Five Towns Jewish Times. Lyndon Johnson's maternal ancestors, the Huffmans, apparently migrated to Frederick, Maryland from Germany sometime in the mid-18th century. Later, they moved to Bourbon, Kentucky, and eventually settled in Texas in the mid to late 19th century. The facts indicate that both of Lyndon Johnson's great-grandparents on the maternal side were Jewish. These were the grandparents of Lyndon's mother, Rebecca Baines. Their names were John S. Huffman and Mary Elizabeth Perrin. John Huffman's mother was Suzanne Ament, a common Jewish name. Perrin is also a common Jewish name. Huffman and Perrin had a daughter, Ruth Ament Huffman, who married Joseph Baines, and together they had a daughter, Rebecca Baines, Lyndon Johnson's mother. The line of Jewish mothers can be traced back 3 generations in Lyndon Johnson's family tree. There is little doubt that he was Jewish. Now, again, that is coming from Jewish sources. They will call that a conspiracy. I am just telling you, these are the facts in terms of his assistance and being the greatest friend, the greatest presidential friend that Israel has ever had. Now, you're looking at the story, you're piecing it together, you're going, Lyndon B. Johnson is just one man. That's where my common sense goes. Okay, even if Lyndon B. Johnson was actually loyal to the state of Israel and he did have some familial Jewish ties, and his aunt, who he loved so much, Jessie Hatcher, was the one who brought him up and told him to do all these things. Even if you wanted to believe all of that, you would go, okay, but we're talking about the assassination of JFK, okay? That would require help and assistance from the state, the deep state, namely the CIA. Do we really think that they would have assisted in that sort of a scheme? Well, you should know that when JFK became president, the CIA had been active for about 14 years. It was created in 1947, so just months before the creation of the nation of Israel, with a signing by President Harry S. Truman of the National Security Act. And I would argue that the CIA is undoubtedly the most corrupt and murderous governmental entity in the world, and not just against people in the world, but also against the American people. Okay, MK Ultra, anybody? The experiments that they have conducted on our troops, on unsuspecting American citizens. And I want to be clear that as another point of concern for JFK during his presidency, he recognized the CIA's corruption. It is why he is quoted as saying that he wanted to scatter the CIA into the wind. He wanted to just completely get rid of the CIA because he understood that they were a corrupt body. And what you should know is that from 1953 to 1961, the CIA's director was Allen Dulles, okay? He is an American, definitively not Jewish. Under his direction, the CIA engaged in all sorts of illegal covert operations. Like I said, most notoriously the MK Ultra program, where they were interested in brainwashing people, creating Manchurian candidates. I mean, the most sinister stuff that you will ever read about. And you should get into those readings, especially if you're one of the people that has purchased Chaos. He was indeed a very sinister man. But is it plausible that there was somebody that he was taking orders from? Is it plausible that Allen Dulles, as he was doing all of these things at the CIA, may have been doing them because he was being blackmailed? Now, I'm saying that. I'm going to read you a shocking article that I think puts another huge piece of the JFK story together, of who Allen Dulles was. Allen Dulles, by the way, also was in charge of the Warren Commission. So he was behind telling the public a ridiculous story about Lee Harvey Oswald. He did it. It's over. That's it. Total sham of a committee and a sham of a report. And it's very interesting when I give you this little tidbit of history that not many people know. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Okay. So JFK wanted to shatter the CIA into the wind. Okay. This is the New York Times, an excerpt of that. They were the one that published this in 1966. It reads, Kennedy's bitterness. And President Kennedy, as the enormity of the Bay of Pigs disaster came home to him, said to one of the highest officials of his administration that he wanted to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. Because the CIA was CIAing, trying to overthrow governments across the world. That's what we do, guys. That's what we do. Sorry to tell you if you thought that we were doing this in the interest of protecting Americans. It's just nothing you learned in history class is real, okay? And JFK made Allen Dulles resign from the CIA following the disaster of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. But like I said, surely Alan Dulles before that must have been his own man. Must have been his own man. Nobody could have been moving him, telling him to do all of these things at the CIA. Okay, stop everything, because I'm telling you that no, Alan Dulles was blackmailed. Okay? I gotta say this right at the top. It is shocking to me how when I'm not even trying to look into Israel, they pop up in everything I investigate as people that are blackmailing someone. Case in point, the Brigitte Macron story. Nothing to do with Israel. Out of nowhere, for those of you that follow that story, we suddenly get to this chapter and we learn that Emmanuel Macron was being blackmailed by Israel because they wanted him to form closer relationships to, I think it was Morocco over Algeria. Just every time I'm looking on it, I'm like, oh, there's another story about Israel and blackmail. Completely foolish if you don't believe that Israel blackmails people, okay? You are out of your mind. But don't take it from me. As I said, we're only using Jewish sources today, okay? And I read this article, which I think nobody has read except for me, but probably not, in Ami magazine. Now, for posterity, because I will be called an anti-Semite no matter what, Ami magazine is an international news magazine that caters to the Orthodox Jewish community, okay? It is published weekly in New York and in Israel. The magazine was launched in November of 2010 by Rabbi Frankfurter and his wife. Again, I say this only to explain to you that this information provided is not anti-Semitic, okay? The facts here really don't care about your religion. On February 10, 2021, Ami magazine published an article that blew my mind, and it was entitled Blackmailing Rockefeller, the scandal that helped Israel become a state. Okay, you're in. We're paying attention now. This is crazy. In the article, the writer, John Loftus, reflects upon how he once upon a time co-authored a book that was called The Witness Tree. So I'm going to read to you what he says about that book. He writes, back in 2008, I had written a historical novel about Reuven Shiloah. Okay, remember that name, Reuven Shiloah, with my Canadian friend and co-author Brendan Howley. Our book, The Witness Tree, was fiction that was based on fact, but putting it out as a novel made it considerably easier for me to circumnavigate the censors at the CIA. Despite 5-star reviews, the only copies ever published were by Random House Canada, and they are difficult to find in print. Apparently, The Witness Tree is simply too sensitive ever to be published in America, even as fiction, because it exposes the families of 2 CIA directors as money launderers for the Nazis. Worse, The Witness Tree tells the truth about how Reuven Shiloah used his knowledge of those secret Nazi connections to blackmail Nelson Rockefeller into creating the State of Israel. Okay, we gotta get into this. Okay, so this guy, to slow that down for you, this guy, John Loftus, published a book. He intentionally made it fiction because he knew the CIA would censor it. The book is not allowed to be published in America. I don't even know what that means. That sounds crazy to me. But he was trying to get past the CIA censors. And so he's like, I got a little story for you about the founding of Israel, and it's got to do with blackmail. Okay. Now it's years on. John Loftus is in Massachusetts. He's working on this project about espionage in Israel. And a guy who is also in the research department comes over to him, and his name is Jim. And Jim says, hey, there's this guy, Dovey, who really wants to meet you. And so John's like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm happy to meet your friend Dovey. And he's like, yeah, Dovey is short for Dov Shiloah. His father was Reuven Shiloah. He writes this, then the light bulb went on. Dove's father not only founded the Mossad, but he was also a key player in obtaining the extra votes in the United Nations that led to the creation of the State of Israel. So you got this guy, Reuven Shiloah, who founded the Mossad, okay? And he, in his book, is alleging, and I'm going to tell you why he's not just alleging, and this seems to be a fact, that Reuven Shiloah blackmailed Nelson Rockefeller and the Dulles family in one fell swoop over their ties to Nazis. Okay, this would mean this is when we got taken over and occupied via blackmail. We're talking about the Rockefellers, and now you're kind of thinking in your head, the Rockefellers. I kind of remember that they were the ones that published all of our education books. Well, imagine if you wanted to blackmail a nation. And now I'm speculating, guys. We're going to get into the story here. What better way than to do it through another family, right? Like if you could figure out how to blackmail the Rockefellers, then people would go, oh, I understand power structures, and the Rockefellers are publishing all these books, making us all dumb via the Department of Education. We're just being lied to about everything. But what if they were not the people that were really publishing those books? I'm asking questions. I know you're not allowed to ask questions. The neocons say we can't ask questions, but I'm not going to stop asking questions, you guys. I'm like terminal. I'm terminally ill with asking questions, okay? Anyways, let's get into the story. So he is saying that what happened, and this is just a little bit about him, it was a year after I became famous. Again, this is the writer of this article is John Loftus. It was a year after I became famous. In 1982, I had been the subject of a double segment on the 60 Minutes news show. It won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. As a former federal prosecutor at the Justice Department, so that's who John Loftus is, by the way, a former federal prosecutor at the Justice Department, I exposed Nazi war criminals who had been hired by some U.S. and NATO intelligence agencies. Like I've said to you, we said all the stuff about Nazis, but then we just hired them and brought them over. Operation Paperclip, it's all crazy. We're lied to about everything. For a few months, I was a two-bit celebrity, and then it was all forgotten. The next year, I worked at a law firm in Brockton, Massachusetts. I received a phone call inviting me to have lunch with an important Israeli scholar. Someone from the Israeli consulate would drive him down from Boston and accompany him. We met at a restaurant in Brockton. He was a charming older man, bald spot on top, white hair on the sides, and sharp as a tack. We got along well, and then he came to the purpose of his visit. What did I know about the UN vote on the partition of Palestine? He's talking about Reuven Shiloah. Okay, so Reuven Shiloah pays him a visit in 1982, and he wants to speak to him about the UN vote on the partition of Palestine. So he's learning this directly from the founder of the Mossad, Reuven Shiloah. And this is the reason why, flash forward years later to 2021, whenever this was publicized, maybe it was a couple of years before then, Reuven's son is now coming to him and being like, what'd you know about my daddy, the founder of the Mossad? Okay, let's just jump back into this narrative, okay? So here is the story that he learned from Reuven Shiloah, the founder of the Mossad. He writes, as readers of my column know, before World War II, Allen Dulles and his brother, John Foster Dulles, yeah, like the Dulles Airport, set up a series of front companies to disguise the fact that their client, Nelson Rockefeller, had invested heavily in the Third Reich industrial complex and was supplying Hitler with oil. Okay, I didn't know that until I read this article, but apparently the Rockefellers, all they cared about was oil and money, and they figured out, let's hire the best lawyers in the biz, the Dulles brothers, to hide all of these transactions that allow us to supply Adolf Hitler with oil. Prescott Bush, the father of future President George Herbert Walker Bush, did as he was told and agreed to become the American fall guy, sitting on the boards of half a dozen Nazi front companies as a placeholder for Rockefeller. So now this brings in the Bush family, another neocon dynasty. Okay, the Bushes are now involved in this. He was told to sit on the board of all of these front companies. In reality, they're just moving oil to Adolf Hitler. This is crazy. This is all crazy. What happens next? What does Reuven Shiloah tell this guy? Okay. Prescott Bush had nothing to fear sitting on the board of all these companies. Why? The Dulles brothers were the best lawyers in the world at hiding illegal investments, or so they thought. You see, their sister, Eleanor Dulles, knew all of her brother's dirty secrets. Okay. Eleanor, it's always a woman. Eleanor was the family scandal. Look at her. Okay, Eleanor Dulles, Alan Dulles's sister. She had married a Jewish professor. Having a Jew in the Dulles family created a bad image for their German clients. So like, Eleanor, what are you doing? Like, you're married to a Jew and we're like, you know, giving oil to Adolf Hitler. This is not a good look, okay? We're not into this. You marrying a Jewish professor. It goes on and says, Eleanor always blamed her brothers for driving her Jewish husband to then commit suicide. So she started making copies of the records concerning her brother's front companies for the Nazi money laundering, including some of the Nazi codes. According to my sources, she gave them all to a man named Reuven Shiloah. Mind blown. Literally mind blown. You guys are like, where is this? I'm going to link this story. I promise to drop it right now in the chat. You can find it. I just told you, Ami Magazine. Google it. Ami Magazine talking about how the Mossad blackmailed in one fell swoop the Bushes, the Rockefellers, and the Dulles family. Okay, and he's published a book on it. So you can go, you actually apparently can't get this book in America. It's hard to get your hands on in Canada, but you maybe would be able to find digital copy of The Witness Tree. I have not read this book, by the way. I've only read this article. When I read this article, I was mind blown. And genuinely, I was just going like, I'm trying to connect with dots here. Like, what? Like, America clearly got occupied at some point. And I don't understand what could have possibly happened. Like, how did all of these American companies suddenly become completely subjugated? And it seems like we're just constantly doing Israel's bidding. And then I find this article and my mind is blown. And this is not anti-Semitism, my friends. This is Ami Magazine. It's very Jewish. Okay, I probably wasn't even allowed to read it. I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I don't even know if I'm allowed to read it, but I read it, and now you're going to read it, and things are getting crazy. So you just have to accept that these are the facts. This is not a conspiracy theory. No one can debunk this article. So the reason why Dovey, Reuven's son, was coming to Reuven was because Jim explained that Dove wanted to talk to me about his father, who had died at the age of 49. So apparently Reuven Shiloah died at the age of 49 when he was only 18 years old. When the video call started, Dove said to me, I think you may know more about my dad than I do. And then he looked at him. At this time, Dove was really old. Dove was 80 years old. And he said, how do you deny an 80-year-old man the truth about his father? So we began to talk. And then he tells him about his dad and how that was then, now you can look into Nelson Rockefeller's involvement in getting, like I said, them to vote on allowing Israel to become a nation. And another piece comes together, okay? And here's my perspective. Israel's been corrupt since its founding. I don't know how anyone could deny that. And when you learn that these methods have been employed forever and that they had their hand in the CIA via Alan Dulles directing policy, it just becomes even more crystal clear. And like I said, they're just involved in so many blackmail scandals. Remember the Matt Gaetz story? Do you remember? Find that episode on my podcast after this. My mind was blown, thinking about what happened to Matt Gaetz for no reason at all. We're covering why Matt Gaetz is no longer going to be a part of the Trump admin. And out of nowhere, we get an Israel blackmail story. I was like, why is Israel always involved in every story pertaining to blackmail? Because they've been running a very sophisticated blackmail op. That's just the reality of things. And they desperately didn't want to register. AIPAC, so desperate. I'm not saying that this had to do with JFK's assassination, but I'm just helping you guys put pieces together by just asking questions. Dun, dun, dun. How dare you ask questions? So here's the truth, okay? Israel has always been interested in controlling American minds. And now when you understand that they blackmailed the Rockefeller family, which prints American books, the Rockefeller family, which is involved in American medicine, okay, you start to ask a lot more questions. And the evidence is overwhelming that they've always had an investment. Of course, they were tiny. There's no way they could have survived this long without taking over our military, okay? Without taking over or blackmailing and getting involved, the Mossad and the CIA. I think they're the same body and they have been for a very long time. This is me speculating now. Take it or leave it. I really don't care. I literally do not care what name you're going to call me for thinking. I'm going to think while I still have permission to. And as I said, I think the evidence is overwhelming. In many ways, I would say Israel has been so ahead of us in terms of understanding the importance of education and the information war and propaganda. Example, Wikipedia. A go-to source. Again, like I said, they just pop up everywhere. A go-to source for so many people regarding what the facts are. You do a quick search, Wikipedia comes up first, and then you find out via a video of Naftali Bennett, who became a prime minister. The prime minister of Israel is in this video I'm about to show you, discussing how as soon as Wikipedia hit the map, they were infiltrating, training Zionists to become the editors. This is a real clip of a future prime minister of Israel. Take a listen.
With My Israel has arranged instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia, which is the #1 source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how it's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
So casual. We're just like trading editors to go in there and to make sure that things are Zionist. You know, look up anything, it's going to be like Zionist spit on it. So it's like, this is not, none of this stuff is conspiracy, guys. And it's like putting together a puzzle, questions that we all have about our government and why it just seems impossible for the media to tell the truth when anybody questions anything about the foreign state of Israel. And my goal in doing this and showing this is that I hope that people who are Jewish Americans can understand that they too are being influenced by the state. Like they too are being led to believe that like if they don't attack every single person who says anything about the state of Israel, there's a lot of things to critique or ask questions about, that somehow they're going to wake up one day and be in a second Holocaust. And that's not the reality, because you're American, so it's American gang gang. You just be American. Say rah 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 USA. You don't even want to move there. You know you don't. This is a great country. It's a wonderful country, and we have to all stop allowing our minds to be warped by their education system. That's kind of my opinion.
Przypominamy, że na naszym kanale nie ma płatnych reklam i jeżeli uważasz, że robimy coś wartościowego, to możesz wesprzeć naszą pracę poprzez datek dowolnej wartości. Możesz też nas wspomóc, odwiedzając sklep partnerski KILLUMINATI, który oferuje odzież, literaturę dla wszystkich przebudzonych. Jest to świetna forma wyjścia z przekazem poza internet. Linki znajdziesz pod filmem. Pozdrawiamy, KILLUMINATI Team.
Dodaj łapkę w górę i subskrybuj nasz kanał. Pozdrawiamy, KILLUMINATI Team.